The Man in the Bottle. The firelight lit up the little cottage quite cheerfully, and after looking all over and even taking a candle end into the attic, Philidor curled up in a big easy chair to await the return of the good witch. "She's probably out visiting a neighbor," decided the little prince sleepily. The chair was so comfortable, and Philidor so drowsy from his long flight through the night air, he soon fell fast asleep and dreamed he had found his royal mother and saved his father's kingdom. A soft thud in his lap wakened him next morning, and starting up in alarm he looked straight into the green eyes of the cat with two tails. "Well," sniffed the cat, transferring herself to the arm of the chair, "since you are still here you may as well fetch me my breakfast." "But where's Tattypoo?" cried Philidor, rubbing his eyes and trying not to show his astonishment at a two-tailed cat. "Gone," announced the cat, calmly washing her face. "Gone!" exclaimed the little prince, jumping to his feet in great distress. "Why, where has she gone?" "Oh, she probably fell down the well," muttered the cat, walking unconcernedly toward the kitchen. "You don't really mean that she fell down the well?" begged Philidor, running distractedly after the unfeeling creature. "Not really?" "How should I know?" yawned the cat. "The milk is in that chest, boy. Just pour me a full saucer, will you?" Her eyes glittered so cruelly and she sharpened her claws so suggestively on the rug, Philidor hastily opened the chest, took out a jug of milk and poured her a full saucer. Then, dropping into a kitchen chair, he wondered what in Oz to do next. He had counted so entirely on Tattypoo's help that without her he felt utterly lost and bewildered. The witch's cat looked at him curiously from time to time, and after she had finished her milk, deigned to speak. "There might be a message on the slate by the stove," she announced, stepping daintily through the open door into the forest. Immediately Philidor rushed over to the stove. Sure enough, there was a slate hanging on the wall, but there was nothing written on it. With a sigh the little boy was turning away, when the pencil hanging on a cord beside the slate moved upward and began to write on the smooth black surface. Philidor's scalp prickled uncomfortably at this odd occurrence, but recovering himself quickly, he leaned forward to read the message. "The Good Witch of the North will never return," stated the pencil mournfully, and falling the full length of the cord swung excitedly to and fro. Such a message was almost worse than none, and Philidor stared in horror at the gloomy announcement. If Tattypoo never was coming back, how could she help him save the kingdom, and without Tattypoo to help him, how was he to save the Osier Isles all by himself? The slate must have been of a magic sort, for while the little prince stood dismally wondering what to do, the pencil began scribbling a second message. "Go to the Emerald City, Ozma of Oz will help you," wrote the pencil in a firm, decided hand. Philidor waited a few minutes to see whether any more advice was coming, but the pencil dropped beside the slate and refused to write another word. With only 2 days left before Quiberon would destroy his father's kingdom, the little boy did not see how he was ever to reach the Emerald City in time, especially as he did not even know in which direction it lay. Going over to the little window, he drew aside the checked curtain and looked out. Deep and impenetrable, the purple forest loomed up on all sides, and with a long sigh Philidor let the curtain drop and went back to his chair. But it was not long before his natural courage and cheerfulness began to reassert itself. Surely the good witch's slate would not advise him to go to the Emerald City if the journey were impossible, and, jumping up resolutely, Philidor began to make his preparations. First he cooked himself some breakfast. There were bread and coffee in the cupboard, and eggs and milk in the chest, and after he had eaten, Philidor's spirits rose considerably. Putting a loaf of bread, a square of butter, some cheese, and a jar of honey into a small basket, he was about to step out into the forest, when a really splendid idea occurred to him. Perhaps there might be some magic contrivance in the good witch's hut to help him on his journey. Setting down the basket, Philidor searched carefully through the whole cottage and in a small shed at the back found Tattypoo's witch workshop. A huge cauldron hanging on a crane was set in the large fireplace. The walls were lined with shelves and the shelves covered with curious boxes and bottles. With both hands in his pockets and his crown on the back of his head, the little prince tried to decide which to take. The labels were mostly in magic, a language Philidor had unfortunately never studied. Taking down a blue box, he started to open it. Now this box had an eyelid and it winked at Philidor so knowingly that he gave a jump and knocked a simply enormous bottle from the shelf over his head. The bottle fell to the floor with a loud crash, breaking into 3 separate pieces, and a thick brown liquid began to ooze out upon the floor. As Philidor, dropping the blue box, looked down in fright and dismay, the liquid began to run into the shape of a man. Backing into a corner, the little prince watched the queer figure forming on the floor. It grew more and more distinct, thickening through the middle, and finally, as Philidor, with both hands before his face, backed as far into the corner as he could, the man out of the bottle curled upward and made him a deep bow. "I thank you," he began in a husky voice. "I've been shut up in that bottle for 30 years and thought I was shelved for life." What are you?" stuttered Philidor in an unsteady voice. "And how did you get into the bottle?" He half expected the man to melt and run away, but the liquid from which he was formed seemed to have hardened perfectly and, except for his strange eyes and powdered hair, the old fellow looked almost natural. He sighed deeply at the little prince's question and, seating himself on a low bench, motioned for the prince to sit beside him. Rather nervously, Philidor seated himself on the other end of the bench. "I am a medicine man, and a Gilliken," began the old gentleman solemnly. "Of course," thought Philidor with a little chuckle. "Who but a medicine man would come out of a bottle?" "I spent my whole life studying cures and remedies, but though I hung out my sign, and had office hours every day, no one ever came to consult me," said the medicine man sorrowfully. But this was not strange when you stop to consider that no one in Oz is ever ill. However, it was very dull for me. The little prince nodded sympathetically and gave a slight start as he noticed for the first time that the medicine man's eyes were cough drops. He was so interested in this discovery he missed a whole sentence of the old fellow's story. "So I decided to travel," the medicine man was now hurrying on to explain, "and discover cures for trouble us people really did suffer from, such as impatience, bad tempers, rudeness, and so on. In the forests hereabout grow many powerful roots and herbs, and it was while I was searching for an herb to prevent talkativeness that I met the Wicked Witch of the North." "Mombi," gasped Philidor, edging closer, and thinking how much mischief this old sorceress was responsible for. "Yes, Mombi," sighed the medicine man mournfully. "I had a great cauldron of cough mixture, which I always use as the basis for all my cures, boiling over the fire, and Mombi, declaring I had stolen her rarest herbs, threw me into the pot." Philidor shuddered. He could fairly see the furious witch pouncing upon the helpless little gentleman. "She threw me into the pot. Didn't you fight?" he asked, as the medicine man stared sadly at his boots. "Oh, yes," the little fellow assured him earnestly, "but Mombi had the strength of 10 men and tumbled me into the cauldron before I could even call for help. Being a native of Oz, I could not be utterly destroyed. I remember quite distinctly melting into the cough mixture and later being poured into a bottle. After that I recall nothing till you knocked me from the shelf this morning." "How do I look?" he asked. "You look all right to me," answered Philidor kindly. "How do you feel?" "Well," answered the medicine man, clearing his throat experimentally, "I feel a little hoarse, but I suppose that's the cough mixture." Jumping briskly to his feet, he walked over to a large mirror that hung on the wall of the shed, and leaning forward stared long and earnestly at his reflection. "Well," asked Philidor as the little man continued to gaze in the mirror, "are you the same?" "No, I've shrunk." "It must have been the boiling," mused the medicine man in a depressed voice. "My eyes look queer and there's a queer rattle in my chest. Hear it?" He shook himself from side to side, and Philidor was forced to confess that he did. "Never mind, though," piped the little fellow at last. "I'm out of that bottle, and that's something." Throwing out his chest, he put both hands in his pockets and beamed upon the little boy. Philidor gave a frightened scream and, pointing at his shirt front, bade him look in the mirror. No wonder Philidor had screamed. When the medicine man threw out his chest, both sides of his shirt front flew open like the doors in a small closet, disclosing 3 shelves. On these shelves stood a row of boxes and bottles, and as the little prince continued to stare, the old gentleman took out first one and then another. Clicking his heels together, he sprang gleefully into the air. "It's all my remedies," he explained excitedly. "My laugh lozenges, soothing syrup, cross drops, and everything. How handy to have a medicine chest and always right with me." "Doesn't it hurt?" asked Philidor doubtfully. "Can you breathe all right, and don't it feel hollow?" The medicine man took 3 long breaths, put back all the bottles and boxes, and slamming the doors of his chest shook his head delightedly. "It feels fine," he said gaily. "But look here, isn't this Mombai's hut, and hadn't we better run before she comes back?" Philidor had been so interested he had forgotten his own troubles for a few moments, but now he rapidly told the medicine man the mischief Mombai had done to his own royal family and of the threat of Quiberin to destroy the Osier Isles. Then he explained how Mombai herself had been conquered by Tadipu and later put out by order of Ozma of Oz. The medicine man listened with interest and concern, and when the little prince told of his flight on the Blue Gull to the Good Witch's hut and of the strange disappearance of Tadipu and the message on the magic slate, he ruffled up his wonderful hair and declared himself ready to go at once to the Emerald City. "2 heads are better than 1, he asserted stoutly. "You released me from that odious bottle, and I shall never rest until I have repaid you." "Thank you, sir." Straightening his crown, Philidor smiled gratefully at his strange new friend. "Oh, call me Herbie," chuckled the medicine man, winking his cough drops eyes merrily, "and I'll call you Phil for short." "How will that be?" "All right, Herbie," laughed the little prince, deciding it would be quite jolly to have this gay little gill lichen accompany him to the capital. Herbie heartily approved of his plan for taking some of Tadipu's magic along, and after a short search they took the Good Witch's thinking cap from a peg on the door and a rope they found curled up on the kitchen table. The rope was marked jumping rope, and would come in mighty handily on a journey of adventures. Pouring several saucers of milk for the cat with 2 tails, Philidor put the jumping rope in the basket on his arm, and declared himself ready to start. Herbie had the witch's thinking cap slung round his neck, and almost instantly it proved its magic powers. Neither Herbie nor the little prince knew in which direction the Emerald City lay, and as they stood looking uncertainly into the forest, the medicine man bethought himself of the cap. Putting it on his head, he asked it to tell them the way to the capital. The medicine man's little brown face looked so comical under the cap ruffles, Philidor could not help laughing, but Herbie, closing his eyes, began to walk straight ahead.